Morning everyone, and welcome to this morning's meeting of the Economy Scrutiny Committee. I think everyone's got their mics on mute, so we're going to get started with today's agenda. Item 1 is urgent business.
None received, Chair.
Item 2 is appeals.
Again, none received, Chair.
Item 3 is interests. If any members wish to declare a personal, prejudicial or disclosable pecuniary interest on any of the items on today's agenda, now is the time to do it. Okay, I'm not seeing anything. Item 4 is the minutes. Members will have seen the minutes of the meeting on the 5th of November. Are there any comments or questions on those minutes? Are members happy to approve those as an accurate record? I will take silence as assent on that one. Although I can see a couple of nodding heads, so that's good. Thank you. Those minutes are approved. Item 5 on this morning's agenda is the Manchester Digital Strategy. We have a report in the pack from the Director of Inclusive Economy, but we also have a presentation this morning from David Carter, I think. Yes, there's David Carter. I don't know if anyone wants to, if there's any introductory comments that either Angela I'll hand over to Angela Harrington to say some introductory comments, and then I think Dave's going to talk us through the presentation.
Thank you, Chair. I'll keep my introductory comments very brief because the substance is in the presentation. I suppose just to say that it's very timely for us to develop a digital strategy for the city. So we had one previously, but the nature of these is they kind of go out of date very quickly because the sector moves on so quickly. There's been lots of good work in the city, though, around digital, and this committee has seen it, I think, over at various points in terms of the growth of the digital sector, the investment, the numbers of jobs that it creates in the city, but also the kind of organisations that are doing really good stuff on the ground to maximise those opportunities. And it does feel timely that we kind of capture that and bring it into a coherent strategy. And City Council is probably, although the investment and the jobs and everything are not the City Council is best placed probably to do that. And then a final kind of remark about COVID. I think COVID has thrown into sharp relief the digital sector on two counts. One is it's a sector that has grown in the city during the pandemic and created jobs, much welcome jobs over the last 9 or 10 months, but also the digital divide has been thrown into sharp relief. So our most vulnerable residents and communities where there is lack of access to technology or the skills to operate it, haven't been able to do some of the most fundamental things that we all needed to do during COVID in terms of online access to services, retail, etc., etc. And there is a very more detailed report on digital inclusion going to communities and equalities this afternoon for those of you who are interested in seeing the detail. And I know indeed some of you, including the chair, are at this meeting. So I'd just like to introduce Dave Carter. So Dave has been steeped in the history of digital in the city. He worked for the City Council and for an arm's length organisation called MDDA in a previous life, not too long ago, and has kind of maintained an academic interest and engagement with the subject. So over to Dave.
Great, thanks, Chair. I'm going to keep this very brief. I'm not going to go through each individual slide, although am I right in thinking a colleague is going to go through the slides on the screen version? Is that correct? So if I say, can we move to slide 2? Is that possible? Brilliant, fantastic. Okay, yeah, nice to be reconnected with some of you who I worked with very closely when I was head of the Manchester Digital Development Agency. And as Angela said, I've been keeping closely involved as one of the co-leads at the University of Manchester on smart cities. And in March, I was asked to take on the role of digital strategist to try and review where we'd got to in this area. And also perhaps have a focus on where we might be going. And at that time, pre the pandemic, we were thinking more of, as the digital sector was growing so fast in Manchester, we ought to think a little bit more about the future and about how local residents could best access the higher quality jobs that were coming through, and how we maintained a talent pipeline that both met the needs of residents and people who studied or came to work in the city. And that's where the idea of doing a new digital strategy, not just for the City Council, but for Manchester as a whole, that would really fit in both with the refresh of the Our Manchester strategy and be very much focused on supporting recovery. And it's good that we're having this discussion today, just immediately after the Powering Recovery report has been produced. I'll come back to that. If we could move to the next slide, please. Clearly, we do need to recognise that in spite of the setbacks that the pandemic has caused, Manchester is completely recognised now as very much the second technology city after London. There is simply nowhere else in the UK outside of London that matches Manchester, whether for the scale of the digital sector or the scope. The fact that there are real particular strengths ranging from e-health and the whole education technology or edtech, right through to cyber, and the fact that Manchester is recognised as being a centre for cyber precisely because of that range and diversity of talent that there is here. If we can move to the next slide, please. We'll see that what we've tried to focus on is, if we want to be a smart city, and after all, who wouldn't, what does that mean in reality? And the reality, I think, in these discussions is that people are at the heart of this. You can't have a smart city without smart people. So we've thought about refocusing that emphasis on people, places and prosperity around smart people, smart places, smart prosperity, but also to recognise there's a kind of cross-cutting aspect of this, whereby we do need to look more at the way digital and innovation supports our zero carbon goals and also the infrastructure. How do we really have an infrastructure that is affordable and accessible to people? If we move to the next slide, please. Many of you will know Manchester was the UK's centre for an Internet of Things national projects supported by Innovate UK, which was called City Verve. The city asked Arup, who were involved in that, to do an evaluation of that, and then to pull that together with a new report on the kind of digital strategies that were being developed both in the UK and in similar cities around the world. And that's been very, very important in forming how this strategy has come together in the first phase of consultation that we've done with our closest stakeholders. If we go to the next slide, please, we'll see that we've tried to say, well, everyone wants to do digital, but what makes us uniquely Manchester, and therefore what kind of digital difference do we want to make here? And you can see there a bit more flesh on the bones of those four focuses, if you like. And if we go to the next slide, you see that already, having been asked to think about so-called shovel-ready projects, we have got four very distinctive projects and a fifth in that we're very much supporting the culture recovery plan as well. So there's no shortage of really good ideas, and I should stress many of these ideas are about social innovation and the great role that community organisations have played in using digital very imaginatively, as well as tech innovation. If we move to the next slide, please. We've talked about the current work that's gone on, and people say, well, what do you mean by a smart city? And this draws out some of the ideas, 6 kind of core ideas from previous work that the city's been involved in through organisations like Eurocities with other European partners. And if we go to the next slide, please, you can see how we've tried to make sure that aligns with the other work that's going on in this area. So the new digital strategy attempts to bring that all together. If we go to the next slide, you'll see we stress that this is in partnership with our colleagues in ICT. That's my alarm just going off to say I've used up my 5 minutes, so I'll try and get through the rest very, very quickly. So just to reassure people, working very, very closely with our colleagues in ICT to make sure that the kind of focuses in the digital strategy around recovery, around very much the skills and inclusion and diversity issues very much also fit in with ICT transformation. If we move to the next slide, please, you'll see we're also thinking about the future. We're thinking that if you're going to be smart, it's about being green as well as digital, and making sure that digital can help empower the whole green agenda. And if you think about the 4 game changers that are in the Powering Recovery report around innovation, city centre and public realm, the residential retrofit, and the role of things like the North Manchester General Hospital refurbishment in North Manchester. These are all things that the digital strategy itself complement and enhance and build into. If we go to the next slide, please. You'll also see we try and make sure this aligns very closely with what our colleagues are doing across the rest of Greater Manchester. And already it's been a pleasure. We like plagiarism sometimes, that they've actually taken our idea of smart people, smart places, smart prosperity, and are now using it in their focus, acknowledging that it came from this work that's being done here in Manchester. And then finally, the last 2 slides, we've tried to link this to ideas about an action plan, which then could be reviewed every year. And we've identified the kind of headlines. We're hoping, well, we know that this will be no more. If you go to the last slide, please. We know that this will be no more than 20. We might make 21's a bit of a magic number in digital. Key asks that will inform future development. And it will be something which we can measure our progress against in the future. I'll stop there. I'm conscious of time. Very happy to answer any questions at all. I hope that's given you a reasonable overview of what this piece of work is trying to achieve. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Dave, and thank you for setting an alarm to keep to time. That's, I think, possibly a first. I haven't. I've asked members to indicate now if they've got questions or would like to say anything. I don't know whether Councillor Lees or Councillor Murphy, I think, were indicating that they weren't looking to say anything to add to the presentation. So I'm going to suggest we move on to questions, and we start with Councillor Johns.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you very much for the presentation. So, I mean, I have a particular question about smart resilience and what we mean when we talk around deploying digital connectivity as a utility. It sounds a bit like a manifesto promise from 2019, which I actually didn't think was a bad idea, if I'm honest. But I'd be interested to know what we mean by that, and also the extent to which that's something that we as the City Council can support that perhaps doesn't require support from national government to achieve.
Thanks very much, Councillor. Very happy to answer that.
Dave, if it's okay, I'll take a group of questions because I've got a couple of other members. It's just easier then if we can pick up the points. So I'm going to bring Councillor Shilton Godwin in now as well.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the presentation. I mean, it's obviously very timely discussing this, and I'm really pleased to know that it's being discussed here in conjunction with also with this afternoon, because I do think that inclusivity is a massive issue. So going first onto that, obviously the other side of the inclusivity is not simply the infrastructure and access to it. It is about residents having the skills, not just to be able to get online and use this, but to continually update. And one of my real concerns is how do we find the capacity to continue to maintain that? Because, as Angela said in her introductory remarks, these things go out of date very quickly. I've lost track of the number of times I've switched platform in the course of my work in life. It's never been easy. It's a very current issue for those of us in City Council now. Don't like to refer to private grief, but it's probably not that private. And I think most of us are struggling. Well, if we all think that we are reasonably technically savvy, how on earth are our residents who've never had access to those kind of opportunities? How are they to do it? And it's to me, enabling people to get those skills and keep them is a massive challenge. So that's the question that I wanted to raise. The second one was about, you mentioned it, Dave, about green infrastructure. I've been reading quite a bit recently about how, in fact, the use of technology and increasing use of technology, streaming, live streaming, is actually causing really quite a significant impact on global carbon emissions. And I wanted to know whether included in this is the capacity to ensure that the council and its partners procure from partners that are committed to, and properly committed, no greenwash, no fig leaves, properly committed to ensuring that their carbon, that they are carbon neutral, or no, sorry, carbon zero really, or carbon negative, because if we're not, then whilst we're doing all of this work on the climate emergency, on the one hand, we're undoing it with the other. There's something that's quite unseen. So those are my questions. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Councillor Shilton Godwin. I'll take one more question, Dave, if that's okay, before we move to answers, and it's from me. I'm always interested when we have papers on digital reports and presentations on digital strategy, in the physical infrastructure that's required for, because I think it's very easy to get swept up with the idea of clouds and Internet of Things as being a sort of nebulous, ephemeral quality, but there's some really serious physical infrastructure work that needs to be done. So I wondered if you could say a little bit more about Fibre Manchester, and I think it's quite a basic question. In order to kind of meet the ambitions that we've got, who is going to lay the cables? Who is going to own the cables? I mean, I was tempted to ask a similar question to Councillor Shilton Godwin. I suspect trying to have a full digital strategy where the entire supply chain is carbon neutral or carbon zero, zero is impossible. It's something I've been very interested in as well, but I guess we could spend the rest of this meeting debating where we would get cloud storage from and if it would be environmentally sound. There are a couple of very good documentaries that you can watch on that, but I'd recommend not streaming them in HD unless you want to feel like a complete hypocrite at the end of it. But yeah, I just wondered, Dave, if we could talk a little bit more about that physical infrastructure and what changes need to happen physically in the city to make this happen. I think that's 3 questions, so quite a lot for you to respond to there.
Okay, thanks a lot, Chair. I'll deal with the infrastructure question and the green, and I think Angela is going to pick up on the skills side. In terms of infrastructure, ironically, this is resurrecting something that Manchester was a real pioneer in. As part of the Commonwealth Games Legacy project, we had a project called East Serve Wireless, where we got connectivity and kit into 3,000 homes in East Manchester, which had the result of driving up household internet access from 9% to 49% in a little over 2 years. And I think having achieved that and having seen the rollout, particularly with voluntary sector organisations playing a very important role in supporting people, we thought job done. We thought the market would then deliver. And what this pandemic has revealed is that the kind of broadband deals in the marketplace are perhaps not as affordable as it's claimed. A lot of people work on pay as you go. And the infrastructure we built then, we had a kind of almost a slogan, which is it was as cheap as chips, i.e. it should cost you the equivalent of a bag of chips per week to connect to something that kind of did the job. So could never have afforded to do anything for free, even with grant aid. And from a pilot project in Tameside, a number of the smaller operators got together and formed a digital cooperative called Cooperative Network Infrastructure, CNI. Now, if you're a co-op and you operate on what the state aid rules are called market economy operator principles, i.e. you get benefits by collectivising the ownership of the different assets, but you're operating on market terms. There's no state aid, there's no procurement issues. If you've got empty ducts, say where the civic quarter heat network's going, you can put your own fibre down, you can invite your members to put fibre down, or you can just keep the duct empty for the future. It's a model that was really under scrutiny by government, by the DCMS and people, and it passed. And in that process, we saw the real opportunity to resurrect things. Some of the things we've done in East Manchester, some of the things we've done on the corridor with the empty ducting there, some of the things we were planning to do with empty duct in public realm, and really organise. And so we've joined in partnership with Tameside now, and we've had interest from another 3 districts in Greater Manchester. So it can be done. What it means is operating as a utility. It's available everywhere. So every library, every community building, every public space can be somewhere where you can build wireless connectivity, part of which will be free, part of which will be incredibly affordable, and then part of which will enable the operators to supply to businesses on market terms. It should be a win-win-win. And so that's what we're going to look at. In terms of the green thing, increasingly, we work very closely with data centres. People think of data centres as horrible old tin sheds at the back of Beyond employing 3.5 people. Increasingly, they're not. They provide a lot of value-added services. They're a really important source of technical employment for our residents. And most of them, particularly the ones we work closely with, are green or are very much striving to be green. They make sure all their energy is drawn from renewable sources. And in fact, they're now putting money back in. They're some of the investors in renewable energy projects like onshore wind are actually those companies. And so while others ignore it, increasingly that part of the industry are exactly the sort of people we should ally with to make sure. So for example, if you're going to roll out electrical charging points for electric vehicles across the city, that needs fibre, because the wireless is only as good as the fibre it connects back to. So it's a fantastic opportunity to put fibre everywhere, to have it on what we call the open neutral host co-op model. And again, it helps business, it helps drive up connectivity, and it provides service as a utility, not just as a commodity, as we say. Maybe I should stop there and just ask Angela if you could pick up the skills point a bit more, if that's okay, Chair.
Yeah, sure. And thanks, Councillor Shilton. Godwin, that is a perennial issue, I think, but just to kind of provide some reassurance. So in terms of the report that's going to Communities Inequality Scrutiny today, what that sets out is we have a scheme that provides digital devices, data, or a combination, and skills wraparound, or any piece of that jigsaw that might be needed. So there's something like 467 digital devices gone out. There's a equivalent number who've been supported with kind of skills to get up and running, or have had one piece of that jigsaw, but not the rest of it. And the kind of starting point is for people to get connected, and people, you know, there is a very good, we've already know from the evaluation, there's already excluded, and we are kind of signposting people to Maze and the college in terms of developing those skills at the most kind of basic level. At the other level, we know that the demand for digital skills in the city is huge, and it you know, continues to grow on all sorts of levels. E-commerce, e-tailers, etc., do very well through the through the lockdown, but need kind of a whole range of digital skills. So the kind of pedagogy for the sort of boot camp type offer that's filling that space is very much around teaching people, providing people with the skills to be able to pick up any other kind of languages or programming or whatever that will be in demand, so that they can make that transfer easily, unlike those of us who might be transferring from one system to another that we know about. But and then there's also an age dimension here, I think. So people who are digitally excluded tend to be older, and younger people tend not to be, but there are younger people who just use the very functionality of their phone to go on social media or stuff, but not kind of getting beyond that, which is where the real opportunities are. So still a challenge there. And I think education, so schools and colleges in the city we did a digital skills audit, but that was pre-COVID, but actually that whole piece has accelerated around what a blended learning offer looks like, and the role of digital there, and the need for investment in the skills and learning of their staff, so that staff are confident to use digital platforms to teach their students. And I think on the whole, that has it's not without its challenges, but that has kind of scaled up massively over the pandemic in a way that gives you confidence that actually that's going to be a feature longer term, to the benefit, I think, of the kind of students coming through that system, both younger people and adults. I hope that gives you a flavour of where the kind of digital skills piece is.
Thanks, Angela. Was there anything from Councillor John's question still to be picked up? Oh, that was the first question, Dave. Sorry, we've gone a bit backwards there. Was there any points from that to pick up?
I'd probably put the question back to Councillor. I hope I covered the main things about utility and infrastructure, but he might have a follow-up question. I mean, I tried to get through it fairly quickly. And perhaps I'll say, if there are any members who would like more detailed information, of course, I'm very happy to provide that as a follow-up if people want to email me.
Thank you. I have a couple more questions, and there may be some picking up and follow up. And I just, but I think your answer was pretty thorough there, Dave. But I was just aware that I interrupted you at first. On the Tameside issue, members, or certainly members who were on the committee at that point, we did have a presentation. It was before. It was a couple of years before I was chair, I think, and we had a presentation about the stuff that had happened in Tameside. So it's something that this committee has seen before.
Great.
And just one point of clarification as well on the paper that's going to communities and equalities, just so members are aware, I won't be attending that. As item 7 on today's agenda points out at one point, university teaching is constantly in flux under pressure, and so I will be heading elsewhere to do that. However, we have got Councillor Hacking on our committee, who is the Chair of Communities and Equalities, who will be keeping an eye on making sure that we have good continuity between the two reports today. I have a question from Councillor Stanton. So I'll take another group of 3 questions, and Councillor Stanton's next on the list.
Thanks, Chair. And I should apologise because my computer accidentally shut itself down a few minutes ago. So if I am asking a question that ends up being the same as Councillor John's, please do feel free to tell me that it was in fact the same as Councillor John's, and I will go and watch us all on YouTube a little bit later to see what your answer to him was. But it was interesting. I particularly like some of the follow-up questions by members around Greenstruff, and what Councillor Priest said around being around not streaming things in HD. I thought was really interesting, and I think it would be remiss of me at this point to point out that in my own ward of Didsbury, there are certain areas that still can't get reliable broadband that would even allow you to stream HD. Content, particularly in the westerly part of the ward, bordering Princess Parkway. It's the newest part of the ward. Pretty much everything there is a new build. But I tell you what isn't new build, and that's the telephone infrastructure and the broadband that runs upon it. So when we're looking at digital inclusion and exclusion, and when we looked at some of the things that, for example, the City Council itself is wanting to do around moving people towards video conferencing rather than face-to-face consultations, I suppose my question is, to what extent does anything proposed in this report and the wider project actually resolve the issue for people in areas that cannot get access to the technology where you would think they could get access to the technology? Now, I understand that they are taking private provision, their internet service provision will be via a private provider, and that we wouldn't necessarily look to interfere in that. But when we're looking at full fibre rollout, how can we do it in a way that we do it in partnership with the state provider, the private providers, so that everybody actually gets this ubiquitous and standard level of broadband that realistically is going to be required but isn't yet had if we want to move to this more digital model? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stanton. Councillor Johns actually had indicated, I don't know whether he's coming back or going to repeat the question for you, Councillor Stanton. We can have a rerun for you, but Councillor Johns.
Thank you. And no, Councillor Stanton, I hadn't asked that, so well done, I suppose. Just in terms of my question, I definitely got an answer, so thank you for that. Just a follow-up really is just to clarify on the ownership, whether the ownership of the infrastructure that goes in is then owned by a cooperative or if it is under sort of municipal ownership. And then another question, which I don't necessarily expect an answer today, but it'd be really useful to be pointed in the right direction, is just around how the model can deliver that kind of cheapest chips connectivity and why that is different to the way that the private sector puts its offer together. What makes the difference that allows those savings? It would be interesting to find out, but again, I don't necessarily expect an answer to that today, because I appreciate that could be quite a difficult question to answer. I'm aware that the introductory paper asks us to comment on the report as well, on the presentation. So I suppose in terms of some comment, I think the 4 smart themes are useful, and I think are definitely in the right place. I suppose I had 3 half questions, half comments that sit within that. One is, we talk about the Manchester Digital Office in the action plan, but I don't know if we could have more detail about what that would functionally be and how that might work. And it's related to the next comment, which is around responsibility, because obviously you said in your introductory remarks that this isn't just a strategy for the council, it's a strategy for the whole city. And I'm very much on board with that and the importance of partnership working. But I still think it's important that there's a level of ownership and responsibility for delivering on the strategy, and it would be useful to understand where that sits and who would be held accountable for its progress. And then finally, the discussions and the questions about the true carbon impacts of the digital sector is really interesting. And I think it's crucial that we recognise that, but I think that perhaps the action plan, it's mentioned higher up in the presentation that it is a consideration of the strategy. But apart from what one is it, 14 about greater mutual support between green and digital initiatives, I'm not sure it necessarily comes through in the actions. So I'd be interested in understanding what actions we can take to reduce the carbon impact of the digital sector. And the presentation talks about the smart energy themes, and that sounds really interesting, but I don't know if it feeds through into the actions at the end.
Thank you very much, Councillor Johns, and for picking up those quite specific comments on the presentation, which I think is really useful. I have two other members indicating. I'm going to suggest, because they've both indicated brief comments, that I take both of those, and then we get some responses. Slightly renegade there, taking a group of 4. But Councillor Shilton Godwin.
Thanks very much, Councillor Priest. And thank you for the response to my question about the working skills in particular, that's what I want to comment on again. I'm obviously not surprised to hear that it's being considered. How to enable people to fully participate in the economy is an ongoing theme in this on this agenda, and it's something that this this scrutiny committee is visited again and again and again, and it's right that we do, and it's right, you know, and we always will. It was very interesting to hear about the links in with Tameside, and I think that is great. What I would say though is what bothers me is about the question of scale, because it seems to me that people who can afford new hardware, who can ensure that they upgrade when they, you know, financially they've got that is available in their area, those people are able to power ahead all of the time. And so what we're looking at here is how do we try and maintain people at a baseline. And whilst I think it's a great idea to get that infrastructure into libraries and public buildings where people can access it, that is very far from being the same as having it at home and online 24/7, as other people are. And so it raises that concern about increasingly a wedge being widened between those who have and those who don't. I recognise, of course, the phenomenal constraints in doing, you know, in tackling that. The same point really applies to the skills. You become more skilled when you get multiple opportunities to practice the same things again and again and again. And if you are only simply able to go to the library and use it for an hour twice a week, I think that will mean that people can't access that, don't get the chance to develop their skills. And I wonder whether there's an opportunity to think about that question of scale. What I didn't get a sense of is about the numbers. How many people do we really think are excluded from this on a work point of view? And where are they? And how many people are we reaching? It was great to hear historically about the stuff in East Manchester, but I also noted that 51% of those households did not have access. And so I think we need to think really big about this, otherwise we're looking at increasing the difficulties that we have with inequality in the city. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Shilton Godwin, and Councillor Green as well wants to come in, I think possibly on a similar-ish aspect of it.
Thanks, Chair. Just a couple of comments first. The global pandemic has completely transformed our digital aspirations, because certainly in terms of the education sector, we have had digital strategies going on for a number of years, and the global pandemic and the lockdown forced us, many of us, into a situation, and colleagues who are on the front line delivering skills were thrown into this incredible sink or swim. We're on a digital platform now, we're delivering blended learning, and the world has just completely shifted and transformed. And I know that any digital strategy now will be starting from a different place. I just wanted to comment on a little bit of learning in that process. I learned a hell of a lot about the reality of digital poverty, and some of the things that I hadn't considered before. So, for example, if we're now delivering learning at home in a blended way, so learners are accessing, yes, absolutely, if they haven't got the kit, they can't access. But even if there is kit in that household, they have parents working from home, there's competition going on for that kit, they might have a sibling who's being schooled from home, etc. So it's not just as simple as even having a piece of kit in the home. Huge challenges. But one of the things, one of the experiences, and I'll get to my question really, is this, that when the lockdown happened and the world changed and we were all thrown into this, and from an education point of view, we suddenly had numerous learners who didn't have access and couldn't therefore engage in learning, so we're excluded. The good thing about the total lockdown was that, for example, in our college, we had tons of kit on our estate that we could loan out. So we were getting our own laptops that we use in the college to learners so that they could access learning. And that was helpful, and that was an emergency fix. Now, when the term started in September and we were all back in inverted commas, albeit in a different way, Of course, the kit is then required back on the estate, and we still have a gap with learners not having access at home. And now the point I want to make is, I was aware of numerous strategies going on local authority, GM-wise, which was grants and various bits of money that was coming forward. None of it was in enough time, and none of it was really helpful. So my question really is, in this new world, and that blended learning's going, it will continue and will be a normal part of life now, and knowing about the digital poverty that exists, is there going to be a joined up GM procurement approach to supplying kit and access to kit for those people who need it? I know we were all knee-jerked into a situation and doing the best we could, but surely from a GM point of view, there is going to be a GM procurement process, and I'm just wondering where that might be up to. Because the good news is we have been kicked into this new world. The skills have been acquired very, very quickly. Look at us now, all online here and doing this. Who'd have thought that before a national lockdown? So I'm sorry I've said a lot, but it's just my recent experiences have really brought it home to me that we need a lot more kit for a lot more young people I'm talking about in this scenario, and we need a joined up approach to procurement if we can have one. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Green. And I think just, I know Councillor Green sort of began that comment talking about experiences in further education sector, but I'm sure that there was comments that certainly comments that she made there that I think is applicable to higher education, but particularly and very importantly the school sector as well. So I think her comments were across the board for education, and I think from my own experience, we shouldn't ignore that question of digital poverty when it comes to higher education, no matter what stereotypes we might have of students learning in our city. Some of the issues that Councillor Green raised in relation to further education are certainly ones that I saw firsthand with higher education as well. So there was quite a lot there, actually. Dave, did you want to start with some responses?
Yeah, if I start off on the infrastructure pieces, and I think, again, Angela can come in and comment on the procurement and the GM-wide and the digital office proposal. In terms of infrastructure, the reason why these new models like the digital cooperative can bring down prices is it offers a way for some of the smaller players in the market to come in where they don't have to dig up the whole city. In the past, if you were a new operator, you'd come along, you'd have to lay your own fibre, and part of the problem, including as the councillor in Didsbury said, you know, most of the commercial offers just are upgrading Victorian equipment, the basic system, the use of copper. Dates back 120 plus years, and what the new models are enabling people to do is to reach out without building, without overbuilding, a kind of dig once policy. And one of the most exciting things, although it's not been without its problems, because ducts that are left for a couple of years get filled up with sand and all sorts, is the partnership with Metrolink. With Metrolink, T4GM along all the newer lines have empty ducts, and what Tameside were able to do is reach agreement that there could be multi-use of those empty ducts. So everywhere, nearly, it's not 100% true, but nearly everywhere where there is a tram line, you can build out and enhance connectivity to those areas, certainly within half a kilometre, maybe up to a kilometre from any point. So there's some really exciting future potential there. Unless the City Council was connecting its own buildings, it would not own the infrastructure. It would be either owned by the co-op or by a co-op member. There are some interesting developments. For example, we're just beginning to start discussions about, well, what about the infrastructure that Northwoods have for their own delivery? Could that be now made something of in a different way? And along to the question of access, then by doing this and spreading it out across the city, and if you like, spreading the load amongst a dozen providers. For example, in Stockholm, you can get 1 gigabit broadband for £7.50 a month. There are 17 providers, but the city says no one can dig up the street unless they put empty duct in and so on. So these are models that are tried and tested. They're not models that are so innovative, it's dangerous for us to try them. So I think there are some really, really exciting opportunities there. And I do think that, you know, ownership is probably not so much of a problem as it certainly was a few years ago. In terms of the digital office, and Angela will pick this up, but there's a range of options. You know, like with the Climate Change Agency, do you have a sort of arm's length body? Do you have something in a particular part of the City Council? Do you do it in partnership with an outside body like Manchester Digital? We're just beginning to look at the options. As you know, the usual cliche, nothing ruled in, nothing ruled out on that one. So maybe on that, I should hand over to Angela, if I may, just to bring up the skills and schools issue.
Sure. In terms of the Councillor Green's points on the education sector, absolutely, I think they're spot on, and I think it reflects the experience in the city, as well as your personal experience in the city region. I suppose what I would say in terms of I'm not aware of a GM-wide procurement approach that might happen. I will see whether there's something happening there that we can hook into, but I think we've had to kind of get on and do in terms of the city. So, and the report, I think, going this afternoon kind of sets that out in some detail. So across, and it kind of touches on Councillor Shilton Godwin's question, but doesn't answer it, which is, you know, I know, for example, that as well as the kit that we've been able to get out to residents who haven't had it, and the skills and the wraparound support, Mays are kind of getting out about 600 Chromebooks for their learners who don't have access. And back to your point, Councillor Green, I think adult learners have done particularly badly, actually, for a couple of reasons, including households. We know freesoul learners in the city, for example, where there was some data and kit in the family or in the household, the kind of adult learner was at the back of the queue in terms of accessing it, because, you know, the children, the young people had exams, etc., and that was kind of prioritized. So you're right, it isn't just having one piece of kit. So we've tried to start to kind of build some scale in the city, and, you know, the college, Manchester College, has done a lot through the lockdown period. Generally, their experience was, although, you know, most students had some sort of mobile phone device, it wasn't equipped to do learning online. So they invested in data for their poor students, as they could access learning in the same way as everybody else. And I think, you know, I definitely think the education sector is starting to invest in a much more serious way in terms of this kind of whole piece, which is helpful. There's also been Ofsted are particularly interested in what post-16 providers have been doing. So they have done a sort of inspection of both Loreto College and the Manchester College, and it isn't an inspection as in they're affecting their Ofsted grading, but it's about how they've responded during the crisis and been agile and changed the curriculum and their delivery, etc., and both have been very positive. So, you know, have a look at those as well. Hope that answers your question. I will come back on whether there's a specific GM procurement one, but I think, as in a lot of things, we just need to get on and do what we can in the city while we're waiting for kind of wider pieces that might happen.
Thank you, Angela. I'm going to ask Councillor Murphy just to comment there as we come to the end of questions, and pick up if there's anything there that he can offer a response to as well.
Thanks for that, Chair. And I think it's quite appropriate that we've got the report going to the scrutiny this afternoon on that digital divide, because I think it's something that has certainly been exposed over the last 10 months and something we need to address. And part of the whole reason of having the digital strategy is it's great Manchester being at the top of the digital tree within the country, but it's staying at that top of that tree and making sure that the opportunities that are available to all residents within the city, and that can only happen if we sort some of that digital divide. So it is key to how we're going, and I say we think we've actually realised how big a divide that is. I just want to welcome the work that Dave's doing. It's really good to see him back here, and actually the enthusiasm I think the committee have seen that Dave has, and the knowledge he has of what's happened in the past can actually help us in that future. But it's part of a journey for the whole of the city that we need to work together to make sure we continue that. And it's really been important, that conversation we've had, and that we'll have this afternoon, about how we can get the whole city moving with us, because it can't be just seen as some elitist sport, in effect, in certain pockets of the city who are going to get that full advantage. The full advantage needs to be all over, and we need to make sure we're working together on that. And I really will take on board all the comments, and we'll come back as to how we can actually improve the offer for Manchester residents. So thanks for that discussion this morning.
Thank you, Councillor Murphy. What I'm gonna, I mean, I think we have noted the report. We have commented on the presentation, and there were hopefully officers and exec members have heard some quite specific comments that have been made by the committee today. Obviously, flagging up once again that there is the paper on digital exclusion going to communities and equalities this afternoon. And I think that aspect of that, and for this committee, that access to equal opportunities of work and skills and employment opportunities is something that we'll want to keep an eye on. And the question around the, I guess the kind of the impact of blended learning and the new needs that have arisen as a result of that Councillor Green outlined is something that we will possibly want to return to or request further information on. What I'm going to suggest as well is, I think that a sort of another theme that came out of this is related to infrastructure and the idea of this as being like a utility, and a utility that is required for businesses, for learning, and for residents and domestic use as well, you know, the same as electricity might be, and that there's questions around ownership and management of that utility that I think tie in with questions of access as well, that we want this to be a utility that everybody can have. We don't want anyone to be excluded from it. And I feel that that might be a theme that we return to. We did have the presentation a few years back from Tameside, and I think perhaps maybe next municipal year we pick that back up again, and we might be in a better position to talk about things like digital office and how that's, you know, how that's sort of overseen. You may have heard some noises then. I'm not sure whether it is installing digital infrastructure. Maybe I'm going to be fibre. Maybe I'm going into the net at some point, and this is just preparing my entrance. But yes, so those are the comments I think that the committee would like to take on board. The strategy, I believe, and I've just been reminded by Angela that the strategy is going out to wider consultation, and that'll result in a final draft strategy that we may want to return that to this committee and have a look at after that consultation as well. So that's something for members to be aware of. I'd like to thank you for the presentation, and thank Dave and Angela for responses, and Councillor Murphy for responses to members' comments. I'm going to close that item now, and we shall move on to item 6, unless I turn into, as Councillor Stanton has pointed out, the plot of the film Tron. So we'll move on to item 6 on today's agenda, which is I will try and read the full item title out. HS2 Phase 2B Western Leg Design Refinement Consultation Response. We have both the report and the as the appendix is MCC's response to that. I'm not sure, Councillor Lees, did you want to kick us off with some introductory comments, or is it Hilary that's going to be doing that?
Well, I'll be very brief. I think Pat and Hilary will respond to questions on this, but there is actually quite a lot of detail in here. I think the bottom lines I'll give you is that that there is a lot of positive going on in that High Speed 2 is still going ahead. It's still coming to Manchester, and this takes us actually towards the next stage, which is getting a bill before Parliament. So all of that we are very supportive of. I think the report indicates, though, there are things that we're not happy about. I'm sure Councillor Lovesey will say something about this, but we're not happy about the proposals for the Fallowfield retail site on Birchfields Road. And it's a point I made, I think, last week when this was discussed at the combined authority. This is not the sort of NIMBYism we get in the Chilterns. This is where members of the community have identified 3 alternative locations in the same in the same area, and we'll continue to obviously press that. There are a whole range of issues about traffic management, and a little bit of a conflict in view between the City Council, which wants to reduce traffic, and it would appear High Speed 2 that want to increase it, which I think we will resolve in time. I guess issues around the airport station, in particular, that this does have to be an integrated station, not simply a High Speed 2 station. The integration is particular with Northern Powerhouse Rail, with Metrolink, the Western Link for Metrolink, which will serve other parts of Wythenshawe and proposed commercial developments in that area, but also making sure that it is accessible to the South Manchester, North Cheshire population. Perhaps the thing I do have to mention is that we still pursue what is the optimal solution for Piccadilly Station. This takes us a little bit forward in that Metrolink, having an alternative stop with more capacity under the existing station run slightly to one side, will now be contained, and that's a real positive. But they are still talking about a surface station that, apart from that, will take enormous amounts of land unnecessarily. But certainly in terms of a presentation that Pat and I attended with the Mayor of Greater Manchester a few weeks ago with Transport for the North, we're absolutely certain that it will not take all the capacity for High Speed 2 Northern Powerhouse Rail. That presentation was on improved rail links from Sheffield to Manchester. So actually building a surface station that has no growth capacity, yes, underground will be more important, but actually the short-sightedness of this beggars belief, really. And DFT have now agreed, and work is going on assessing the underground station. But I think the case for the underground station in terms of long-term value for money, I think grows stronger all the time.
Thank you, Councillor Lees. Hilary, Pat, did you have anything you want to add, or do you want to just respond to questions?
No, I think that was a very good summary. We'll just respond to questions. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, before I call members to ask questions, I'd like to call Councillor Lovesey, who's going to speak on behalf of her colleagues as well. Councillor Lovesey.
Thanks very much, Chair. Thanks for enabling me to speak today on behalf of not just the Rusholme, but also the neighbouring ward councillors. We are all opposed to this site. To be brief, we are obviously really grateful for the support we've had from Council Leader, from senior officers in opposing HS2 Limited's identification of this northern end of Fallowfield Retail Park as their chosen site. But you know, the draft that you have before you in section 8 covers a number of important issues to do with what's wrong with the site and the failure of HS2 to take seriously the alternative sites that we've asked them to look into. But at this stage, I'd want to speak on behalf of the other councillors to have a strengthening of the text, in particular in paragraphs 8.4, 8.5 and 8.6, so that we can convey more effectively what we see as the 3 unacceptable impacts that this site would have on our schools and on our residents. And what we're referring to here, there are 2 adjacent schools, secondary school, Manchester Enterprise Academy Central, with which will have 1,100 pupils attending it by the time it's completed its 5-year intake, and the completely close to the site, alongside the site, Birchfield Primary School with 700 pupils. And it's their opposition, the school's opposition, which I think we need to convey. It seems to us quite unacceptable that HS2 is choosing a site which will have such impact on 2 flourishing schools. So I want to start then, the first impact is for Birch Primary itself. No other school is in such close proximity to any surface structures as we have in any part of HS1 or HS2 as we have in this case. So this school will have absolutely alongside it built a vent shaft which involves tunnelling out 30 metres deep. It's going to take 5 years to complete 2 very large surface structures which will hem in and overshadow this school and be a blight on its future. We regard this as a body blow to this school in particular, in terms of the choice. In addition, the 2, which are really large, will take out a park and ride facility which currently parents coming by car use. As a result, the loss of this park and ride will mean a quite unacceptable degradation of air quality around the schools, because we will have all these cars queuing in a narrow residential street in order to reach the main entrances. We'll have cars idling. All the children and staff coming and leaving from this school will have an unacceptable impact in terms of air quality for their lives. And finally, we will lose decent local shops which are accessible to residents who don't have access to car, and we will be losing the time when we as a council are really wanting to encourage our residents to do things like shopping without their cars. We want these kinds of shopping centres to be the face of our future as we face climate change. So those are the 3 issues, and I think it's the impact on the schools in particular that needs spelling out a bit more. But probably the way forward is not for me to suggest wordings now, but to suggest, to make some proposals afterwards to yourself and to senior officers. And we would also want a 4th site to be included, which has been discussed previously. So there's an A, B and a C in Paris 8.4. We would like to see a 4th site, which is actually the other end of the retail site, included as a possible compromise. Thanks very much, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Lovesey, and I think members will be aware. I think Councillor Lovesey's addressed the committee before on this issue. We have talked about it before, and I think it is alluded to in the report that we were hoping that one of the outcomes from that would be, as is mentioned, and I think council officers believe that the local councillors would be more involved in the process than has happened. So I thought it was very important, even though unfortunately, Councillor Lovesey, you did have to repeat some of the stuff that you have said. I think it is really important that we keep. It doesn't mean it's gone away. It doesn't mean it's been dealt with. I have members indicating, but I think Pat wanted to just come in there as a response to Councillor Lovesey's comment.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, very happy to strengthen those points in the report. I think just to advise the committee, we did have a meeting with HS2 seniors and the ward members to discuss these issues, and as Councillor Lovesey said, we offered a compromise solution at the rear of the trading estate. Their response to our offer and to the request to consider the 3 sites that we'd already suggested was that they didn't want to put the vent shaft on the playing fields because that would mean it would impact on amenity for residents whose houses backed onto, faced to the back, at the back to the centre, the Armitage Centre, and would therefore disrupt their amenity. And then there was further issues around, well, it would cause antisocial behaviour problems, quite flimsy excuses in our view as to why they weren't prepared to consider the Armitage Centre as a possible option. We did ask about the 5th vent shaft, which would enable other sites for this to be considered, and we've got they said they've done the work to look at a 5th vent shaft, but we've neither seen that work so far and are not convinced that they have actually done it. Thank you.
Thank you, and I think it's clear that this is informing much of the response, and I think Councillor Lovesey's point about strengthening language, obviously, that's been taken on board. I have 3 members indicating, so I'm going to call Councillor Noor first.
Thank you, Chair. As a neighbouring ward to Rashram, where the shaft is proposed for Polwarth Retail Centre, I want to say as well, thank you to the Council for supporting and wholeheartedly agree with everything Jill has said. So that's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Noor. Next, I have Councillor Johns.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Lovesey, for again talking us through those issues. I'm really strongly supportive of what you have to say. I mean, the response that Pat has passed on behalf of HS2 Limited about residential amenity is quite strange, because I had exams at the Armitage Centre when I was at uni, and I seem to remember there being a brick wall that goes all the way around the site, so that seems odd. And also, when you look at the amount of money they're spending on vent shafts, I've just Googled to look at some of the pictures, they do seem to be able to come up with architecturally pleasing vent shafts in some of the countryside, so I don't know why we should get any less. But so yeah, I'm absolutely happy for us to support that. It sounds like that's something the council is willing to take forward in its response, so that's fantastic. I thought it'd be useful, I've got a few questions, but I thought it would be useful to try and understand, it is in the introduction of the report, but what this process actually is, because I think, so my understanding is that, you know, there's the consultation, and then HS2 Limited make a recommendation that then goes into the hybrid bill. I suppose it was really useful to hear what Councillor Lees had to say about some of the parallel stuff that is going on, but it'd be good to understand how it all fits together, if that makes sense. You know, what the process of this consultation and what we might ask for in parallel to a formal response, whether that's writing to the Transport Secretary for a meeting at his earliest convenience or something like that, because obviously I'm aware that as this moves forward, the lobbying turns from being official to political, if that makes sense.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Johns. Councillor Shilton Godwin.
Thank you, Chair. Well, I would like to add my voice as well to support for the Rush Home and the Levenshulme councillors in opposing this, and I'm really pleased that they are being supported by, you know, the council formally. I think the cases that have been made, which result, you know, the impact on air quality, the impact on children's education far outweigh the impact on amenity or antisocial behaviour, which is something that we're no strangers to dealing with in the city. So I find it quite astonishing that that should have been proposed as as a response to concerns of such gravity being raised, and I hope that will continue, and I hope we'll be successful in combating that. I wanted to just talk about the Piccadilly, the main station, and say that I'm also really supportive of the idea that we continue to push on having on the alternative to the underground station rather than the surface station. I was amazed to read in the report that there are real concerns about capacity, that capacity for HS2 would be reached at day one. That's just not even safe. So I'm astonished that that's still in scope. I think it is absolutely essential that we have this underground station. I think that as far as the economy is concerned, that level of connectivity is really, really important. And so the difference in connectivity between people being able to go up and down, but across a short space rather than walking an awful long way to connect from Metrolink to NPR to HS2, to me just does not make sense. And so I would really want to endorse continuing to push on that. I think it's very important. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Shilton Godwin. I think it was Hilary was going to come back in on in response to Councillor John's question. What I will just before Hilary responds is to remind members of the recommendations that we have on this report. So this is a report that this report and the response will be going to executive, and we have been asked to endorse the recommendations to the executive. And I draw members' attention to the third of those recommendations for the executive, which is about delegating authority to the strategic director to finalise the response. If members could let me know whether or not they're happy or unhappy to endorse that recommendation, I think that would be that would be useful. I'm going to ask Hilary to respond to start the responses to those questions, and if any members do wish to make any further points, let me know in the chat.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, so in response to Councillor John's question around the process, so yes, we respond to the consultation. As with previous consultations, HS2 Limited don't tend to provide an individual response to consultations. They provide an overall report which summarises all of the responses that they get back, and we have noted on a number of occasions that we feel that's quite poor response to consultation. We obviously continue to work alongside HS2 Limited in terms of trying to influence the designs that will eventually go into the bill. Although we understand that a number of them are now fixed and would need to be dealt with as additional provisions to that bill through the process. There will be an opportunity to respond to a consultation on the environmental statement, which goes in as part of the bill, which does cover environmental mitigation that is expected to be carried out. There will also be the opportunity for us to petition against aspects of the bill, which would then go in front of the select committee and could potentially, if accepted, lead to amendments to the bill. In terms of what else we can ask for, certainly I do know that Afzal Khan has asked for an urgent meeting with the HS2 Minister to discuss the vent shaft issue in particular. So there are obviously political representations that can be made. We're obviously also engaging with senior officials at both HS2 Limited and DFT on a regular basis, both ourselves as officers, but also through the leader and the mayor, in terms of trying to obviously get our points known. But there are clearly more, I think, political options that could be looked at as we get closer to the bill deposit. I hope that answers the question. And obviously we appreciate Councillor Shilton Godwin's support for pursuing the underground station option at Piccadilly, which is what we continue to push for at all levels.
Thank you, Hilary. And I have a couple of members who just want to come in with some further points, and then I'm going to suggest that we bring this item to a close. So I have Councillor Stanton.
Thanks, Chair. And really, I just wanted to lend my support to all members that spoke in favour of, in fact, against some of the proposed locations of events in their wards today. In Didsbury, in a prior consultation we dealt with, in Didsbury West, sorry, in a prior consultation we dealt with an inappropriately placed event chat, and I actually want to say thank you to Council for everything that they did on that, and also everything that local residents did. I would hope when it comes to even that successful relocation in Didsbury that we still make sure that that vent shaft has the least possible ecological impact and leads to the least possible loss of wildlife and wildlife species in the area. And that's what I'd like to say on that. But thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Stanton. And Councillor Johns wanted to come back in with some further points.
Thanks, Chair, and thank you for the clarification on the process, Hilary. I suppose for the length of time I've been a councillor on this committee, we have only really scrutinised the council's response to HS2 in relation to these consultation responses. And so whilst it sounds like the council is doing all of the stuff that we would ask for in terms of that wider lobbying, the wider political engagement, and we don't perhaps need to add a recommendation on that, I think it's just worth us saying that we strongly support the wider lobbying and argumentation that is going on around achieving the city's aims. I mean, in terms of Piccadilly Station, I'm really strongly supportive of an underground station with integration with Northern Powerhouse Rail. I think the build it once, build it right approach of the council is absolutely correct. I mean, Piccadilly Station was built in the 1840s, and the decisions that the Victorians took are still dictating the way that we travel today. I think the government and HS2 Limited seem quite short-sighted actually on what's supposed to be a transformational and a once-in-a-generation infrastructure project, that they aren't able to look beyond the budget of the next 5 years to what this might look like in 100 years' time. And all those points about capacity and integration are quite fundamental in that. I think I know that there is strong cooperation across the north on HS2 and Northern Powerhouse Rail, and I think it's worth the City Council, where we can, stating our support as well for the eastern leg to move forwards, and for some of our partners across the north to win on their aspirations, because I think ultimately this is an element of our voice being much stronger when we're working in partnership with others across the north, and I'm absolutely aware that we're doing that through Transport for the North. I suppose I just had a few other points on. I wonder if the changes to the Green Book in the Comprehensive Spending Review might add to our argumentation in any way, particularly because we talk about recognition as some of our wider strategic goals. And obviously the changes to the Green Book, though not perhaps hugely transformational, do suggest that big infrastructure projects should take better, take more in terms of wider strategic priorities, and we have very clear strategic priorities around Piccadilly. And obviously, as a city centre councillor, I'm very keen that we don't have our plans scuppered by short-sighted decision-making from HS2 Limited. Yeah, that's what I have to say on that. Thank you.
Thank you very much for those comments, Councillor Johns. I'm going to ask Councillor Lees to respond and perhaps make some points of his own as well on that one. And then I will ask Pat to respond to some of the specifics there that you've said as well, Councillor Johns.
I think two things. First of all, in terms of the eastern leg, we have continued to support the eastern leg, and indeed I have provided quotes to colleagues in the East Midlands and Yorkshire and Humberside supporting the action they're taking. We've always argued that this is about a network, not about a collection of individual lines, and we'll continue to support them support them there. So in terms of Green Book, I did give an example earlier of improved rail services from Sheffield, which we've been pursuing since, I think we wrote One North in 2014, I think, so we're 6 years on, and there has been always agreement from Department for Transport that we ought to be able to meet the journey time that was set in that document. However, if you apply the existing Green Book, none of the proposals get above the 1 BCA. So certainly changes to Green Book, which are being made, of course, because the current Green Book arrangements do effectively discriminate against the North, may help. We certainly need something that is a more strategic approach rather than the backwards-looking approach that comes out of the Green Book at the moment.
Thank you, Councillor Lees. Pat, I think you had some responses to Councillor John's points as well there.
Just to add, Richard's picked up most of my points, but yes, it will be helpful, that Green Book review up to a point, because it does question the over-reliance on BCRs and promotes the need for a greater weight to be given to the strategic case for schemes and the ability to achieve local and national objectives rather than just a straightforward what's the direct economic value. So that is helpful, but part of our concern is that different departments use different methodologies for assessing these schemes. So where you've got other departments involved, it then becomes very difficult to have assessments that everybody can agree on and take into the account wider benefits. And just on the eastern leg, we are still involved in the Connecting Britain campaign. That still goes on, and that's about the cities of the North coming together to champion our needs for better connectivity. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thanks for the responses and to all the questions and comments that members have raised. I think it seems from the comments that members have made, and also the comments that they've not made, that this committee is absolutely minded to endorse the recommendations to the executive as laid out on the front of the report. However, as always, we hope the executive will take into account the comments and the questions that have been raised by the committee, in particular draw attention to the request for a strengthening of the language around the vent shaft site. I think actually Louise Wyman would like to come in there to respond on that.
Thank you, Chair. And just to say to all, thank you for the comments. We will feed those into this consultation. The consultation is due in next week, so we'll absorb the comments, particularly in relation to the vent shafts. We'll continue to work. This is a connected piece of work, and we're committed to the real benefits that HS2 will bring to the city, but do that in a way that's well designed, that makes the most of opportunities around Piccadilly and Mayfield and the central opportunities. So thank you for that, and we will take your comments into the final draft that we submit next week.
Thank you very much. Well, it's good to have that very immediate. Normally, I'm used to saying we hope you will take our comments into account. It's very good to have that immediate confirmation that they will do. Thank you to Pat and Hilary and Louise and Councillor Lees for responses, and thank you, Councillor Lovesey, for attending today and speaking on behalf of Rusholme and neighbouring wards. I am going to, as I say, we've endorsed the recommendations to the executive, so I'm going to close that item and move on to item 7 on today's agenda. Item 7 is our update on COVID-19 activity. Louise, did you want to say some introductory comments on that? And then I'm not sure if Councillor Lees wants to comment, or if you're okay with, yeah. So I'll ask Louise to comment, and then Councillor Lees to give some introductory remarks.
Certainly, thank you, Chair. This is just this is our update. Quite a lot has happened actually since we were last together. Obviously, we've been working through this current period of lockdown and the changes and the impact that has had on the city. We had the spending review announcement last Wednesday on the 25th. Big headlines there. 4 billion for levelling up, 3 billion for skills, but the real job of work for us now is how we land that in Manchester. We launched the same afternoon, Wednesday last week, our economic recovery plan, which got great publicity. It's been referred to already in this meeting, but titled Powering Recovery, and it sets out a very clear plan that we have for a city that our partners, our business community have adopted, were with us at the launch. So there's a lot we can do. We've identified business cases for investment to attract that funding from the spending review. The report gives you a lot of information to update you. Again, something that's already been mentioned, the fact that we're now the leading city outside of London for digital growth, and we really have seen that grow during this period. So there's lots we can do to drive new job generation and the digital inclusion pieces that we've discussed already. You've got the figures also on footfall in the city, which we did see decline, but hope to see pick up now that we're out of the second lockdown. You've also got the information on the local restriction support that we've been rolling out, what we've been doing with our business sounding board, our real estate community, and our offer around skills for 16 to 19-year-olds. So that there's quite a bit of content there. Again, happy to take questions.
Thank you, and I think members can probably see, because I think we're all getting used to these reports and the way that new information is highlighted, and I did notice more highlighting than last time, which I think in some respects is a good thing. Councillor Lees, I think, was going to give some introductory comment as well.
More about the very short term and context, really. And clearly this week is that the good news was the lockdown ended. The bad news is that we're in tier 3, which means that an awful lot of businesses that have spent a lot of money making themselves COVID secure are not able to operate, they're not able to operate at all, never mind normally, and that isn't good news. We continue to work with business, particularly through Business Sounding Board, to campaign for a different approach from government. But the very short-term aim is that for the first review, which will take place next week, that we can demonstrate that we are, even within government's criteria now, in the position we should be in tier 2 rather than tier 3. And the numbers at the moment, and that's cases per 100,000 for the whole population and for over 60s. The pressure on our hospital system, particularly on intensive care, all say now that at the next review we ought to be in tier 2. If we compare ourselves with the authorities that were put in tier 2 this week, our numbers are now comparable with those. Clearly, we need to maintain that direction of travel, but really important. The economic recovery plan is for the next few years, but really, I think the next couple of weeks are going to be really important to be able to make that move. And I think that's all I wanted to add, Chair.
No, thank you, and I think it's part of that really significant balancing act with, for us as a committee, for everyone, is thinking long-term recovery, but also being very aware of some really specific short-term stuff that's happening. I've asked members to indicate if they would like to ask questions on this. I'm going to start with Councillor Shilton Godwin.
Thank you, Chair, and can I thank all of the staff and others who have worked so hard on everything that they have put in place for an economic recovery plan. It's very, very challenging work. What I really wanted to talk about was how difficult it is to do this work in the context of the failure of government to really recognise the depth of the lack of financial support that is given to the city and to the city region in the context of the length of the time that in one form or another we've all been living under massive constraints, and it seems to me that every day that goes on, the chances of people, of more people being put into worse situations continue, and it's extremely frustrating that that is not properly recognised, and that the impact on the sectors that affect the economy in this city, hospitality, culture and leisure, and how those interact through the supply chain is absolutely really fundamental. And so I want to also commend those people who've been trying very hard, I recognise, to lead on this agenda and to really highlight this. And so obviously that includes Councillor Lees and also Andy Burnham from the GM point of view. And I hope that at some point all of these extremely valid points do get listened to. Can I make a really small point, which is about understanding the footfall you mentioned, Louise, when you were talking in your introductory remarks about the footfall. But looking at these reports, it's really quite difficult to really get a sense of the trends and the changes. I think it would be really useful if, because I'm sure somebody will have it somewhere, that if we got the year-on-year data, because when we're just comparing week on week, -5 this week, really in terms of the long term, that it would be much more useful to look at the year-on-year and the cumulative. And I think that will really help us to get much more of a sense of changes in patterns in people's behaviours, which may be begin to become embedded. So it's really notable, isn't it, that district centres have suffered far less than the city centre itself and the regional centre. And I think looking at that more globally rather than on such a granular basis would probably help longer term thinking. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Shilton Godwin. And I think it will be important to get and perhaps for us as a committee to think about data in that way as well, because I think we are moving to that point where, particularly with things like high streets and district centres, we need to know whether whether COVID has created a problem or exacerbated a pre-existing problem or a pre-existing trend. And I think this has been something that has been is being spoken about quite a lot, particularly in terms of the retail sector at the moment, and how, some of the news that's come out about major retail companies, major retail sites as well. So having that year on year would help us to understand where in the pattern this fits, or if what we're seeing is completely and utterly unprecedented, anomalous. And I have Councillor Johns next, and then I think Pat has said that we can certainly talk about getting that information and it be provided. But Councillor Johns has some questions, comments for us as well.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you very much for keeping us updated. And even the effort of highlighting the new stuff is just really useful. For us, I suppose it's quite sad actually, because obviously this was prepared on a rolling basis, that you can see where the tier system has kind of scuppered a lot of the plans as they were developing. I think what Councillor Lee said in terms of where we are with the prevalence of the virus in the city seems positive, but the tiers and obviously the news of the vaccine gives us some sort of source for a bit of long-term hope. But there is also just so much in here that is really concerning, and I think there's two things that in particular I would pick out. One is obviously the retail, the real estate subgroup talked about the nervousness for January and February, and I think that is something that I'm concerned about. This committee has explored the relatively low wage levels that residents of the city experience. We know that over the course of the pandemic, people on lower wages have lost income, whilst those with higher wage levels have often actually had savings. And I question whether or not there's enough pent-up demand in the economy that when there is a sort of larger scale reopening, that there will be a splurge of spending and activity that can spur the economy on. And we know that January and February is obviously generally a difficult time for hospitality after the kind of Christmas period. And obviously the Christmas period that hasn't taken place this year. So some thinking about what we can do in January, February and March around spurring on activity could be useful. I'm sure that's already going on, and that's just a concern. The other thing is obviously the city centre is seeing a very rapid increase in people claiming unemployment-related benefits. Obviously, it's what 1,300 more or less. 1,300 claimants isn't huge, but it is a significant rise, 480% in the report. And whether it's appropriate now or whether we could set up a discussion with city centre councillors just to understand maybe what's driving that. And I'm very conscious that the vast majority of my residents are renters, and that puts them in a particularly difficult position when it comes to unemployment, and particularly in the way that universal credit wouldn't cover city centre rents. So it'd be useful to sort of understand a bit more about what that 480% looks like, if possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Johns. I am going to ask Councillor Lees to start the responses to those questions and comments. Obviously, Pat has already responded on the question around data and footfall data. Councillor Lees.
Sorry, Chair, can I suggest that you bring Angela first in on the unemployment question? It's my comments were more political. I think Angela will give you rather more in terms of hard information.
Sure, thank you. So in terms of the unemployment figure, so what we do know is, as you said, there's been a rapid increase. It was particularly acute during April and May. It's levelled off since, but it's kind of, it's going in the wrong direction slowly. We know, the Think report highlighted this, and we know from our latest economy dashboard, which you saw at the last meeting and we're working on, so we have much more up-to-date information. Young people are disproportionately affected, particularly in the city, the 20 to 32-year-old age group, which I suspect are, you have got more than your fair share of them in the city centre, but, we're a young city, so people will be in that group. Our BAME residents, so we can see down at ward level that the areas of the city that have higher concentrations of BAME communities have seen a higher rise of unemployment. And the areas that were already employment deprived in the IMD 2019, so kind of large parts of North and East Manchester, so they have, they have, the unemployment has increased disproportionately in those wards compared to other wards in the city. So yeah, that's kind of what we know. And then furlough, so not quite as many people. At one stage, were about a third of the city's working age residents either on furlough or the self-employment support. That's down to about 10% now. And furlough has been extended, but you can predict what's going to happen at the end of furlough, and particularly if we stay in tier 3, actually, because it's the sectors that are hardest hit are the kind of entry-level sectors. So that's kind of where we are, and that's where our skills and labour market work is kind of targeting and focusing and trying to pick people up, particularly if they're large-scale redundancies earlier on. But we've got a campaign going live now on the kind of wider thing. If you find yourself in that position, get in touch. There's information on the council website, and it links through to employment support, but also more basic things like citizens advice or whatever, because you're right, there will be some people who haven't ever found themselves in that position. And then the final thing to say, I think, is that universal credit has been given a small uplift of £20 per week, which has been vital for our poorest residents during this period. And I think there is a case, and it was made by a lot of voluntary organisations before the comprehensive spending review, to keep that £20 uplift if people are to have any chance of covering the basics.
Thank you, Angela. I'm going to bring in Louise Wyman now.
Thank you, Chair. To respond to Councillor Shilton Godwin, and perhaps put this in the comments, we can certainly get the year-on data, except your points there. We put some headline figures in the report, and it is worth kind of just painting the picture a little bit. Nationally, the UK High Street has seen a 74% drop in footfall compared to previous years. If you look at Manchester wide, actually the fall hasn't been so great. It's down by minus 23.7% year on year. So we've done better than the national, but it's still obviously devastating for those retail businesses, for food and beverage in particular. And again, our district centres have done slightly better. The figures are in the single digits there. So we are tracking these trends because it isn't a uniform picture, and it's interesting to see the district centre response as well. And we are probably all shopping and sourcing items more locally. So there's a lot we can do in that space, and we'll bring that more fine-grained detailed data to you. And again, responding to Councillor John's, you're right. I mean, the thing we haven't touched on here is all that we're doing to bring us into tier 2, because our numbers are coming down. The way that we really support the city centre, the food and beverage, the businesses that survive on the trade that they do in the months of December and the New Year period is so crucial. So we're doing a huge amount of work across the system to bring us into tier 2. We have to do that. That is one of the routes out of this. And obviously vaccination, more positive news in that respect, but we are going into a very challenging trading period, and so we will work across our partnerships, public and private, to do all we can for the traders. It's our responsibility.
Thank you, Louise. Pat, can I bring you in there as well?
Just a quick one, Chair. The Business Sounding Board, this is the issue around retail activity is of great concern. So they are looking at a campaign they want to launch in the new year around supporting restaurants and cultural venues and hotels, building on that Eat Out to Help Out model, but kind of specific to Manchester. And there is a campaign in train which we were hoping to launch before the lockdown started, and as soon as that gets lifted or we move into a lesser tier, that campaign will start for real. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Lees.
Thanks, Chair. Start with a comment you made about that they need to balance off very short term with long term. I think really we've always seen the economic recovery as a 3 to 5 year task rather than a 3 to 5 week task, and I think we have to recognise that early on in this process there are likely to be some very difficult times for an awful lot of businesses, an awful lot of people, and clearly we have to do what we can to support them, but I think it's inevitable that we will have that difficult time. It does really go back to the point that Councillor Shilton Godwin made about the level to which there is financial support for both businesses and individuals, and it's worth noting that as we've gone back into tier 3, that tier 3 areas get no more financial support than tier 2 or even tier 1 areas, which is, I think, pretty shocking, really. Second, in terms of the stats we use in the SITREP, clearly we are tracking progress against the crisis. So although we do have data that we can compare with a year ago, it's not particularly relevant to the SITREP, because here we really want to know, are things getting better or are things getting worse? And I think that the data is largely geared up to that. Although a real health warning, I think the footfall data we have for the city centre is absolutely rubbish. So yes, by all means look at it, but it comes from a few cameras, all of which seem to be in the wrong place anyway. We do have actually some access, which we can't share because it's commercially sensitive, from, for example, the Arndale Centre, which gives us very accurate data because they do have accurate data not only on footfall but on spend. Clearly, that's commercially sensitive, but and we're at least able. Our officers are able to use that in terms of planning their approaches. I think the comparison between city centre and virtually everywhere else is that there is a scale here, is that clearly the city centre, as well as the residential population, which Councillor Johns has referred to, businesses also depend on that very large temporary population that comes from the number of people who work within the city centre, but also in more normal times the number of visitors we get to the city centre, neither of which we have now. Just a comment on the first of those, people working within the city centre. I think there was a kind of view early on in the pandemic where there's an assumption that working from home will become the new norm. You can see that if you look at my picture, that I'm not in the working from home, I am in the town hall, because basically after the second day of the second lockdown, I came to the conclusion that I was going to go bonkers if I had to continue working from home. It was certainly severely damaging my mental health. That's not peculiar to me. That we have seen an enormous decrease in people's well-being, increase in mental health problems the longer they've been working from home. There is now some research evidence that shows that people are both working longer hours, including an increase in their hours that exceeds the amount of time they've saved from commuting, and their productivity has gone down as well. So all of this suggests that actually people going to work is not dead. That I think a lot of businesses now recognise that getting people back to work in a more normal way is really, really important. And I don't think that's going to return to kind of Monday to Friday 9 to 5. I think flexible working was already very much the route that business was going down. And I think flexible working will be part of the route, but I do think we will see businesses bring people back into the city centre and to other commercial locations in large numbers as soon as they feel able to do so safely. How long that will take, I don't know. Clearly vaccination will have an impact on that, but vaccination is probably going to take about 6 months before we see the full impact, although Public Health England have judged Greater Manchester's plans to be exemplary for rolling out vaccinations. So it would appear that we've got the planning right. We just need some vaccines now, which we don't have at the moment. That make a difference. But I think it's something that I know members of the Business Sounding Board, again, I think work on, and indeed a lot of the businesses represented in the Business Sounding Board, particularly the smaller businesses, are all working from their offices because they recognise that working from home doesn't meet their business needs or their employees' needs. But I think there is assumption that actually people are going to come back to work, and so the sort of campaigns that Pat was talking about very much grounded in, I think, the evidence that we've got at the moment, which is built up over the past 7 months about what future working patterns are going to be. Some people will continue to work from home, but by and large that is not going to be the new norm. I think that covers the points I wanted to make, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Lees, and I think that's hopefully given quite a thorough, a little bit of a kind of background to some of the stuff, as you say. The SITREP is, because I think this is what I was getting at with the balancing act, the SITREP is talking about what is happening now in response to a crisis. The economic recovery plan is a 3 to 5 year plan, and so all of these things have to be considered, and we do appreciate the clear way the information is presented, even though we might have just requested some additional information, and we do appreciate the clear way that it's been presented to us so that we can also see what is happening. Essentially for us it's month on month. And thank you as well for responses from Louise and Angela and Pat as well to kind of add to members' comments. What I'm going to suggest on that question around the data and around how we look at year-on-year trends, and that is that I don't think we're requesting a major change to the SITREP, because I think that wouldn't be appropriate. That's not what this document is really for. But that I am having, since we are about to move on to the item about the overview and work programme report, is to let members know I'm having conversations with officers about what we're bringing to the agenda in coming months. Obviously, agendas have had to be a little bit more flexible and responsive given the situation that we're in, and that I will take that as chair to talk to officers about how we might look at some of these trends and data, whether we do it through the dashboard or the sit rep, or how we do that, rather than us say now that we want this added to it, because we could request stuff on that sit rep and update till the cows come home, really, and make it quite an unwieldy document. So if members are happy with that, I think that's how we'll approach that data question for the committee.
Can I make a quick comment, please, Chair?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it's just kind of a reminder, really, and clearly the SITREP has been designed for the work of the Economic Recovery Group, and it comes here in the same form as it will go to tomorrow's meeting, and that's partially because we want to make sure that we're still in crisis. There is still an enormous pressure on our staff. It's about making sure we don't put undue work. So quite happy to talk about the content of that, but it's as long as we maintain that of doing it once rather than doing two different things.
No, absolutely, and I think that's what I was getting at. Is that my feeling is that we don't touch the sit rep because it's doing a very particular job. However, the committee may want to request some additional data in another form. I think that I just feel that that's the more practical way of doing it, because, like I say, if we started talking about, if we opened that can of worms, we'd never talk about anything else. Louise, did you want to comment on the economy dashboard?
Yes, it was just to say that we have that document as well, and we've done some work to give us a more of a kind of headlines document of what's happening month by month as well. So that's something that's been developed with our PRI team and our economic and skills teams. So I think there's a bit of an additional piece of work we can bring to this committee if you're happy to. So we have the SITREP as the sort of rapidly updating document, and then the dashboard documents as well with the kind of headlines month on month, if that would be helpful.
Yeah, and I think that's the sort of, as we're sort of planning agendas going forward, I think especially when we're sort of looking after Christmas and what the impact of a tiered Christmas. I'm going to say tiered because, you know, we 3 at the moment, looking to 2, has been on businesses as well. I think there's going to be some work looking at impact. So I think that's probably the best way to sort of to think about what sort of information we might want to supplement this, or as different items. I don't have any members with any further comments. I'd like to thank everyone for really thorough and helpful information to back up the SITREP, which continues to be, and the activity update, which continues to be quite, you know, overwhelming. I think that's the adjective of the year in many ways, isn't it? So we really do appreciate it being presented to us in the way that can assist with the work of the committee. Yes, thank you for your responses and for keeping us updated so clearly on that. I'm going to close that item, and with incredible timing, I think, on the committee's part, move on to the final item on today's agenda, which is item 8, the overview report. Members will have seen that, and will have seen as well the projected work programme. Do any members have any comments or questions? I will remind them that agenda planning maybe has been slightly more dynamic, should we call it, than in previous years, where we've not sat down and sketched out an entire year of agendas, because that seemed doomed to failure. You will see, though, that we have an agenda for January, which is returning to some questions on housing and updates on that. And just to let members know that I have a meeting next week with officers to agree on reports that we're gonna call in for February and March's agendas as well. Any questions? Councillor Shilton Godwin.
Thanks. Just looking at the work programme, presumably we've now done the digital economy and the impact of COVID, which is down as something to go forward, and so presumably that now comes off. It's on.
Yeah.
It's in the themes identified.
Yeah, that was.
I think it might just have been left on by mistake.
No, that's a theme that was identified for us to have a themed session. Obviously, the themes that were picked up when we sort of started thinking about work programming, and then we haven't been able to do a themed meeting in the same way as we would do. I'm minded to keep it on as a key theme that the committee will want to look at, because I assume at some point, maybe in 3 to 5 years, the committee's work programme will go back to something resembling normal. So that wasn't a specific report so much as a consideration. I'm minded not to say that we don't just tick it off as done, but continue, but retain it as a kind of theme of the committee's focus. But as we said when we were discussing digital strategy, it is going to be next municipal year when we pick this up in more detail. So not a mistake, just something that can be a theme and a report at the same time, I think. Any further comments from members? Okay, in which case, thank you very much for your questions, comments, and for responses as well. I am going to say that's the overview report item done, which brings us to the end of the agenda, the end of the meeting. All that's left for me to say, I guess, is Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas, Chair.
Merry Christmas. Thank you. Some of you, I hope I'll be able to see and wish Merry Christmas to in other meetings. But for those of you who won't, yes, have safe and as merry as we're allowed Christmas.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Stay safe, everybody.